Am I on, Tim? Working? Okay, good. So as I mentioned, we had to change our program for tonight. And I picked this topic for two reasons. One is the amazing work that our acquisitions committee is doing now to index the stuff on the blacksmith shop. We have about 40 years worth of stuff down there, donations and all sorts of things. There have been a couple of attempts to really methodically index it. And one of the things they showed me was the tons of photographs we have. And what they finally agreed to do at this point was to get the photographs organized by topic. So they showed me, here's a folder of old photographs of Manchester buildings. Here's another folder of old photographs of Manchester farms and different topics. They have not gotten to the point of indexing every single photograph in the folders because there's so many of them. So I said, that's fine, I appreciate what you're doing. At least when we do research, we'll be able to go to a folder and try to find a photograph of somebody. So that was one impetus to kind of talk about this tonight, to give us some idea of the types of things that we have available in artifacts that are photographs. And the other thing is that over the last 2 to 3 months, I've mentioned before, we have a lot of people wanting to do research of their home or research of their family. Over the last 2 or 3 months, we've had 3 different family groups come in here to KJ, to Manchester, from outside the area to donate things, many of which are photographs. And we've had a large number of old photographs donated to us, some of which you're going to see tonight. And what's nice about these, they generally can tell us who the people are. And the photographs were made in Manchester when their family was living here. So based upon those 2 things, I thought it might be a good time to kind of review through who our early photographers were and the fact that we're on a quest. We do not have a daguerreotype. Daguerreotypes are the earliest form of photography, printed on metal plates beginning 1839, running through about 1850, where you have a print that went through a very complicated chemical processing steps to get it. And you only have one print. You actually have the piece of metal with the print on it. You only have one print. And it was very popular in the 1840s, early 1850s, for Daguerreans to come out of their studios and to come out in the community and do daguerreotypes at people's homes and to do Daguerrean street scenes. So we have been looking for, and we've seen daguerreotypes and early tintypes of street scenes in Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, Saline. But through my many years in the Historical Society, I've never seen a daguerreotype of Manchester, the city, the village. And our quest is to try to find a daguerreotype from the 1840s that would show what Manchester looked like in the 1840s. Probably would have been somebody setting up a camera on Main Street, and it's about a 4 to 5 minute exposure. Take the plate out, let it expose 4 or 5 minutes, put it back in. We haven't found one yet, but we're still looking for it. And we've been in contact with an organization called the Michigan Historic Photographic Institute. And they cover Michigan, and their focus is on identifying and preserving daguerreotypes, tintypes, ambrotypes, those early types of photography. And I put a request to them a few years ago, could they identify a Manchester Daguerrean, a person who went around doing this, or could they identify actual Manchester daguerreotypes? So far they have not done it. Okay, they haven't been able to find anything. And so my very last slide here will be one daguerreotype that we know is of a Manchester early founder. My vision has been to find something on John Gilbert, for example. So John Gilbert, of course, was born in 1774, but he lived to 1860. So he's within the range, he's a founder of our town, he's within the range that there might be a daguerreotype of him somewhere. And I've been working with the Ypsilanti Historical Society because John Gilbert is tied in with Ypsilanti. He was the first mayor, built the railroad, built the mill, everything in Ypsilanti. And we've been working on, together, trying to find a portrait of John Gilbert. No luck so far. All of his descendants have died out. We've traced them all down. There's no more Gilbert direct descendants alive. But about a year ago, we found that his granddaughter, the last living direct Gilbert descendant, had prepared a rather complicated will, because they own a lot of property and stuff. And in the will, there's a thing there, family photograph album. Okay? And she donated it to a library. Had kind of a strange name, a library somewhere. And I took it to Ypsilanti and said, where is this? And they said, oh, that became this, that became this, that became this. It's now part of Eastern Michigan University. So this photographic album is somewhere at Eastern Michigan University inside this library. We tried to contact the library. They couldn't immediately find any record of it. But they said, we have this room back here with all the stuff put in it. It might be back in there. So we still have this quest going on to try to find a portrait of John Gilbert, who founded our town. We were trying to find portraits of the Fargo brothers, who followed John Gilbert. And James Harvey Fargo died in 1840. No daguerreotype of him. But his brother Stephen lived into the 1870s, where he's up in Grass Lake. So we've been in contact with the Grass Lake Historical Society. And they said, well, same kind of thing. We got all this stuff in folders and file cabinets, but we're not sure if we have it or not. You can come up here and take a look if you want. Haven't done it yet. So anyways, we have this quest to find either a street scene like this, that's a daguerreotype, that would show Manchester before the Great Fire of 1853. That's what I like to find. Or early people daguerreotypes. So to start this off, this is one of the classic photographs of Manchester. It's part of a series that was done probably around 1900. It was a series because each photograph has got a code number on it. And this is kind of the starting point here. This is obviously a stage shot of some sort. They got the people together. They got them doing things to show action in Manchester. There's a couple of pictures like this. We'll show another one here in a bit. We did find the earliest daguerreotype that we know of a Manchester family. It was donated to us. We were able to scan it. That is an 1851 daguerreotype of Obed and Eusebia Alvord. Okay, this is their wedding day. They don't look too happy, do they? It's obviously been touched up. I mean, the photograph has been touched up. So the Alvord family settled out on Grossman Road at the very end where it hits English Road. And the owner of that house just passed away a short time ago. When I mentioned that a couple of meetings ago, somebody knew who it was. It's a beautiful brownstone house at the end of Grossman Road. And it was a house built by Obed Alvord. This picture is from 1851, and he's marrying his second wife, who is a sister of his first wife. And this is the oldest daguerreotype that we've been able to authenticate of a Manchester couple or person, 1851. And they showed me the original daguerreotype, which is quite faded, so they had gone through a lot of photoshopping to kind of bring it out like that. So we do have a daguerreotype from 1851 of a Manchester couple out in Manchester Township. And that's the oldest one we have at this point of a Manchester family. The Michigan Photographic Historical Society has done a great job of indexing all the photographers that they're aware of in Michigan. And they were able to send us this list. These are all the photographers they've been able to document who existed in Manchester from 1862 through about 1915. And they put down there that what they best estimated were the years they were functioning here in Manchester. And what you see, there's a lot of turnover. We see that with photographers coming in here that they might be here for 6 months, then they're gone. So there was a lot of things going on, and if you read the Manchester Enterprise, Alan Dyer researched this years ago, and he came up with pages and pages and pages of citations of all the photographers in Manchester and what they were doing, kind of like the Twitter type stuff. Photographer came in, he's done this, he's going to take pictures of this person. And so we have a very good history of who the photographers were, what time period they operated in, and the earliest one we can find is 1862. There's actually a documented photographer with a studio here in Manchester. So clearly no Daguerreans, no early people were operating here. This is one of the earliest photographs that we have, and of a group that was taken by one of these people. It's taken by Harriet Osborne. And what we have found, and what the Historical Photography Society confirmed for us, was that in the 1860s, 1870s, photography was a legitimate occupation for a woman. Okay? When there were daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, where you had the heavy metal plates and acid, and to carry this stuff around, it was not considered acceptable for a woman to be a Daguerrean. But when they started getting into film type things that they could easily maneuver, then women started getting into it. And they did that by calling themselves artists, not photographers. They were artists. And this one is one of the earliest ones that was taken. It's what they call the Keefe girls. So you've heard of the Keefe family. They were very prominent here in town in the early years. And this picture, it was taken by Harriet Osborne. We know that the girl on the right, front row right, is one of John Day Keefe's granddaughters. We've got that pinned down exactly. But we know they're all pretty much Keefe girls. But this is about as early as we get with photographs that we can document who the photographer was and what time period it was taken in. So these artists, Harriet Osborne, who is our second known female. There was a Miss Underhill earlier than her, but we don't have anything from her. Harriet Osborne is operating here. She's got the nice little logo there with the artist thing in there. And you see a stamp up in the corner. When the Civil War came around and our men were going off to fight the war, they were rushing in to get their photograph taken. And their wives or their girlfriends were also rushing in to get their photograph taken. So the men could take a photograph with them down to fight the war, and the people back home would have a photograph of them. Well, the federal government says, how are we going to pay for this war? And one of the great ideas they had was they're going to put a tax on photographs. So if you had a photograph taken during the Civil War, you had to pay a 2-cent tax. And with that 2-cent tax, you had to put the stamp on there saying that the photographer had received the stamp, and the photographer had to endorse it. So up on the top of that stamp you see H.O., Harriet Osborne. She had to initial that she had received the tax money, and she had to date it, September 2, 1864. So wonderful. Got the date on the photograph, and so Harriet paid her taxes. The photograph was legitimate, and it's been a great thing to do to find these old pictures with that stamp on it, to be able to date them like that. One of our great finds here was several years ago. Howard Parr was approached by a woman here in town who had found a photograph album somewhere in a resale shop, and she found it was just sitting there for somebody to buy, and it was Manchester photographs. So she bought it and then donated it to the Historical Society, and Howard brought it in, and I scanned the whole thing. And so what was neat about this book is it belonged to Addison DeForest Keefe. So here we are with the Keefes again. And Addison DeForest Keefe was the grandson of John Day Keefe. He had a fairly colorful life. We wrote about him several years ago. Addison was a, they were kind of strange how they called him insane. They had other words, but from what I can gather, it sounded like he was bipolar or something like that. And he kind of ran all over Manchester doing all sorts of crazy things, and we got quite a bit about him. But he had this photograph album, and when he passed away in 1914, 1915, he was single, and there was nobody left, and I guess the stuff just got thrown out in the trash, and somebody picked it up, and it ended up in a resale shop. And this is a treasure trove of photographs. This one here is a Keefe. He's an older man. The suit he has on is dated, and we actually have a book that allows you to look at people's clothing and photographs, and the clothing and the hairstyles changed so much back then, just like they do now. You can date the photograph. This man is wearing a dated suit from 1840s, He's older. I'd love to know who he is, but I think he's Artemus Keefe, who was the original Keefe who came in the 1830s. So Artemus came in, he had his 4 sons, including John Day Keefe, and then they had the grandchildren underneath that. I think that's Artemus, based upon the fact that he was near the front of the album. Unfortunately, there's no other things written on it, but he's one of those unfortunate ones that's buried up in the old burying ground, because when they opened up Oak Grove Cemetery, they moved some of the Keefes down there, but not all of them. And for some reason, Artemus, the patriarch himself, was left behind in the old burying ground, where he's somewhere, not sure where, but he's lost up there. But this one was taken by Mrs. Butler. We don't have a first name, but Mrs. Butler was operating around 1866. That's about right for Artemus being that age. It's the only picture we have from Butler. Her photographic gallery was over the jewelry store, wherever that was, about 1866. But again, another female photographer, very prominent here in town. And we had so many female photographers at one time, there must have been quite a bit of competition going on among them. This painting is of Louise Merriman Keefe. This is owned by Ann Walton, and Ann's not here tonight, right? Ann Walton owns this. This portrait was done by William Wheeler, who lived here on this property. So the original house that was built here in 1842 was built by the Wheeler family. Prosper Wheeler was a cooper here in town, but their son, William Wheeler, was quite prominent as a portrait painter. And he eventually moved to Hartford, Connecticut, where he got quite a following out there. And you can find a lot of William Wheeler paintings online in different galleries. But this is Louise Merriman Keefe, and she is the second wife of John Day Keefe. So she's right at the top of society here in Manchester when this was made. We're assuming this is about 1843, 1844 was the best guess that we had on it. But the reason I put it on here is that we're also trying to find portraits of people in Manchester, and at least try to borrow them and perhaps get them scanned of some sort. But if any of you are aware, become aware of portraits out there that were taken before photography really became prominent, we'd love to get those. So here she is, and I'm going to say about 1843, and here she is photographed some years later. I'm going to say about, this was probably around 1871 or something like that. Same woman, portrait, and she was photographed by Susan Speechley, who's probably the best known of the photographers from that era. Susan's operating here 1871 to about 1875. Matt Blosser was clearly in love with her because he wrote about her all the time. Always writing about Susan Speechley, praising her work. You should go see Susan Speechley for your photographs. And kind of like, don't go to the other people, go to her. She's got the best. Calls herself again an artist in town. She was very prominent. There's a lot of photographs of her about people in town here. She was only here about 4 years, and then she went to Ann Arbor and became very, very popular in Ann Arbor. But we've got a lot of her work. Here's another portrait of Louisa Merriman Keefe, a little bit older. At first I thought that was the same photo, but a little bit older. Same kind of pose and everything, but this one was taken by her son, who really promoted himself as a taxidermist. And I've always been kind of puzzled why Edward G. Keefe kind of got into photography, took a picture of his mom, but then he puts this on back, a taxidermist and general collector. My guess is Mom, I want to sit down and take a picture. Okay, so she said, I'll get her picture taken. But his thing was taxidermy, and he was quite famous in this area back then. He actually ended up down in Adrian, I think, running a fairly prosperous taxidermy business. But I just thought it was kind of odd that, what was he promoting here by picturing his mom in a photograph like that? But anyways, here's Addison DeForest Keefe. Okay, so this is the grandson now of John Day Keefe. Of course, young boys wore, I'll call them dresses. I don't know if they had a different name back then, but they wore dresses like that. we have a lot of photographs of Edison. He was coddled. He was treated very nicely, but here he is getting his photograph taken. So this would be about 1867. Would you guess he's about 3 years old, maybe? He was born in 1864, so he's probably about 3 years old at that point. And this one was taken by Henry Bissell, another well-known photographer at the time. Photographs of adults photographs of adults made in cloudy as well as clear weather. Children should have the best of light, because children wouldn't sit still. Got to keep that lens open for a little bit of time there. So adults would sit there for 30 seconds or whatever. Children had to have the best of light. Likenesses of deceased friends can be enlarged from daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and small photographs. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But there's another example of our photography. We have a lot of photographs of Bissell available to us. Here he is again. I think that's taken about the same day. He had a different outfit on.
Looks like the same clothes.
Yeah. So the man with him is Nelson Ockrell. And if you're familiar with this, the Ockrell family was a black family living in Manchester post-Civil War. Henry Ockrell, he's Nelson Ockrell. Nelson Ockrell was an employee of John Day Keefe, did a lot of work for him in his different businesses. Ockrell Street behind downtown is named after Nelson Ockrell because John Day Keefe built a home for the Ockrell family on that, they call it an alley back then, the alley behind downtown on the south side of the street, which is now Ockrell Street. And of course his house is gone now, but this is a photograph of Nelson Ockrell. And there's some interesting stuff in the Enterprise about Nelson Ockrell and the Ockrell family and their acceptance in the community after the Civil War. And I know that when Laura Sutton does her talk on Watkins family, sometime in early 2019, she'll talk a lot about Ockrell. And again, going through Karen Genter's materials up there a couple weeks ago, big fat report on the Ockrell family. She researched them, got everything in there. But this is kind of a famous photograph of Nelson Ockrell and Addison DeForest Keefe, which of course they did a nice job of identifying who it was. And 3 years old, Nelson Ockrell, again by Henry Bissell in town here. So what I'm looking forward to when we have the time is going through the material in the blacksmith shop, all the photographs we have, and just start going through them and trying to figure out who they are, indexing them, and tying them into photographers. This is George Keefe, another son, okay? And getting this album out of a resale shop was just an amazing discovery. This photograph was made by a man named William McCohen. McCohen was based out of Tecumseh, but he did have a studio here in Manchester for a few years. And McCohen was very well known. He was basically here probably for about 5-6 years. But he's more famous for his street scenes than his portraiture. This is one of his portrait photographs that he really wasn't so much into that as he was into other types of photographs, which we'll show in a minute.
You have a question?
Yes, yes, yes. Sure.
That one picture of George Keefe, by any chance, on his gravestone in Oak Grove, is the date he was died, is that blocked out? Because I remember I was in the cemetery and there was a George and Jenny Keefe.
Okay.
And one of the names, the date he died was...
It had never been carved in? Well, it's happened sometimes that people die and they're buried, nobody ever comes back and fixes the stone. They buy the stone ahead of time, and then the first person passes away and they put birth and death on there, and then the second one has got the birth, and the second person dies, and they never come back and finish the stone. I know in my family research I've encountered that where the death date was left off. There's somebody very famous here in town that in the early days that they never came back and finished off a stone. I've been thinking about going down there. Just out of respect, you know. Anyways, McCohen was a little bit of portrait photography, but we'll show more of what he really did. This photograph here has kind of puzzled me. What is this? It's First, is it a boy or a girl? Assuming it's a girl, and she's kind of holding her skirt up a little bit, and she's hanging on to something there. Her face is kind of strange looking. I've been trying to figure this one out.
Is that a bathing costume?
Oh, I don't know. It's just kind of an unusual. It's a Manchester person. You know that one.
Rich for photographs, so.
It was made by Butler, so it's Civil War era. Again, it's got the stamp up there on top, 1865. The photograph was taken in 1865 by Butler. You come across these and you wonder, who is this person?
Is that a case?
Is it what?
Is she standing on a chair or something?
Well, it looks
Looks like an armchair.
an armchair. Yeah, I don't know if it's an armchair thing there, but it's just it's kind of an unusual photograph, and
Yeah, but it's on the top too.
you wonder why she was doing that with the skirt. Anyways, we have several that kind of just bring up these questions of what they are. One of my favorites.
Yeah, she's a beauty.
So it's I like the depth on this one. Whoever did this photograph, we think Susan Speechley did this too, but the depth, it's got almost a 3D thing to it if you look at it closely. How she was posed for that, Matilda Wilson Kingsley. So here she is. She lived in this house, and that's likely, she was born in 1852, and I'm guessing this photograph's around 1871, something like that. She married John Hampton Kingsley 1874, I think was the year. So I like the depth of the picture. I like the pose. It's just getting a whole image. That one really came out nice. I'm not sure if that's her or not. The records we have says that's also Matilda Wilson Kingsley. Again, taken by Speechley at some later date, but I'm not totally sure if that's her or not.
I think the eyes are very similar.
Yeah, it was, a much more, that earlier picture to me was, I'm a free woman, and she was very much into, suffrage movement, suffragette movement. He was very much into that. Her history is a lot of women's rights activity. She was the first female school board president in Manchester. Did a lot of that stuff. From what we've been able to put together from various sources, her marriage to John Hampton Kingsley was not the greatest. I guess he didn't like her independence, didn't like her speaking her voice, but that picture tells me she'll speak her mind. And whether that's her or not is a little bit hard to tell, but anyways. Another one from the Keefe album, don't know who it is. He's a Keefe of some sort, but the beard, that beard is just perfectly, it's just perfectly round around the edges. I mean, a meticulous job getting ready for this photograph to get that beard just perfectly like that. That one again taken by Speechley. So I'd say of all the photographs we have, the largest number are from Susan Speechley. Some street scenes. This one is what's called the Rafus and Cap block. It was taken by a photographer named Laverne Wheeler, who was out of Tecumseh. So I didn't take it, so it's not a Manchester photographer, but he came to town and took these photographs. Well, what's amazing about this particular photograph is the detail that's available. So of course that's Old National Bank on the left there, and the carpet tile store and the hair salon nowadays. And what I found is that, let's see if I can do this now. If you enlarge these, you can read the print. Okay, John Hampton Kingsley, J.H. Kingsley Hardware Store. This picture dates from 1878. So in 1878, John Kingsley is about 26 years old. And he's actually, a picture of his first store. And
More likely that's it.
that's him. Yeah, there's two people there, but that's King. I'm pretty sure that we've got some other pictures of John Hampton Kingsley when he was younger. That looks more like him. But amazing, this photograph taken from across the street in 1878. If you blow it up, you can read Kingsley Hardware Store, tinware, stone. I can't read it all perfectly there, but I saw the Kingsley. I said, "Whoa, what a fortunate kind of find to see Kingsley on there." And there was something else I was going to show. Oh, I know what it was. Up in the upper right corner there, it says J.H. Miller. And J.H. Miller was a photographer circa 1875. So we captured a view of his studio, probably on the upper level. They needed skylights back then, so he's got this building, we put a skylight in there. So I've got a picture from J.H. Miller here in a few minutes, but there's his photographic studio. And I just love this photograph because of the detail that's available on it. And
Which side of the street?
that's on the south side of Main Street. So where the J.H. Miller building is where the post office is now. They tore that down. That's the post office down there. And this here is,
The building's still standing, right?
yeah, this is still there. This is Old National Bank right here. The Black Sheep's over here. And then this is the Trabo Salon. And this is the carpet and tile store. Okay. So,
That's a Cidery Bakery rebuilt 1873.
yeah, that building dates from 1873. It was a city bakery at that time. It wasn't the Black Sheep Tavern yet. So some of these have tremendous detail. I mean, photographer did a great job on that. We had two photographers in town that did stereo views. I'd like the Historical Society to get a stereo opticon. We got to find one somewhere. But these were very popular 1870s and early 1880s. Was a stereo, you get a little portable hand viewer. You get the photograph and you go in there and then you can see three-dimensional images. This is a street scene of Manchester taken from on top of the mill. This one dates probably from about 1883 because you can see the Emmanuel Church Tower in the background. So we do this a lot with these photographs. We look at the buildings. Quite often you can look at the configuration of the buildings or the type of building and you can date the photograph very well. And that's the Emmanuel Church Tower going up there, and that was 1882, 1883. So we know this photograph is probably very close to the 1883 period. Here's another one. These are taken, of course, by some of them by McCowan and some by a photographer named Samuel Davis. So between Samuel Davis and William McCowan, we've got a lot of these stereo views of the town, which have been preserved. And people like Samuel Davis would produce maybe 20 or 25 of these as a set. And you could buy a set of photographs. And you'll see here in a minute how they numbered those. But this is taken from the top of what was Ann Arbor Hill. And it's looking south to where the depot was, up on Chibro Park. So here's the rail going through here. Here's the eastern part of town, east of 52. Here's the old Union School in the background there. These are typically have very good detail on them, and the photographers would make money by selling sets of them. Here's another one that was taken. There was a huge snowstorm in 1886. We have the exact date of that. They did a lot of these stereotype shots of the snowstorm. So this again is taken down there at the corner of Main and Clinton. You're seeing the original building that was there. There's a township hall in back, so that helps us date the picture too. And then the old hotel, which stood in the corner, is in there. And Davis, I think both Davis and McCowan came down that day and did all sorts of shots of the snowstorm with people out there. It's so good you can actually see the steam coming out of the horses' noses. I mean, this to me is incredible that you actually see their vapor coming out of their noses on the photographs. This is not a stereo, but it's the same day. The picture was taken the same day. People out there just amazed at the snow going on. So we like getting these where we can get an exact date. We have an exact date associated with this thing, and it's so good you can read the signs for the different merchants down the street there. And again, we have in our blacksmith shop file cabinets over there, we've got a lot of photographs like this that we eventually have to go through and try to pick out and determine who they were. Here's another one. This is again McCullen doing this one out of Tecumseh. Extremely sharp photographs, very, very good detail. This is taken basically out in front of the house here. You can see this fence here is the Kingsley fence on the original house they had here. And then what is now 52 is going right through here. And this is the only photograph that we've been able to find that shows what was called the original meat market. This building here was built in 1840, right in the corner of Ann Arbor Hill and Main Street. And it's the only photograph we have. That meat market building was one of our very original buildings. And
Right across the street here,
yeah, right across the street, yes.
where the bar is now.
Where the supermarket is, where the bar is now was the supermarket. Yeah, that was the meat market. And the meat market was run by a family named Austin, and we've connected them with Austin Road and so on. So yeah, it's a good view of the downtown, showing what it was like. And what's interesting about these photographs is, other than Kingsley's trees in front of his house, there's no trees. And we kind of learned this during sesquicentennial. We were trying to take photographs to exactly replicate the view. So I came out here in Main Street and I tried to take this photograph down Main Street, but there's so many trees there now, covering everything up, I couldn't really get the photograph. And the cameras back then had a different angle of area that they covered, and I just wasn't able to replicate this kind of image. It's in the book, but you just don't see the detail that you would see in an old photograph like this. So this one, March 1878. He's got it dated when he took the photograph. Main Street, Manchester. So we've got a date. Everything is pretty good on that. Nice muddy roads. Okay. And you read Matt Blosser writing his little Twitter reports about women being so upset about their dresses getting dirty, walking in the mud, and crying out for sidewalks. We need sidewalks, and just because that's what it was back then. I blew it up a little bit. This just shows, we were doing research on that building over there. The building existed until about 1880, and we were trying to figure out who all had been in that building, which is certainly one of the oldest ones that we have a photograph of from that time period. Here's one of where the village hall is now. This is the bend around the River Raisin there, showing the original mill structures that were down there. Again, a stereo view. Sheep running down the road. Okay. Taking them into town. This is how they would sell sets. So Samuel Davis made a lot of money in putting together these different views, and you could buy a whole set of views. Each one had a number to it, would tell you what it was. So he's marked that this one is showing view number 11, the foundry and the dam down there. You could buy a picture of the public vault at Oak Grove Cemetery. Not sure why you'd want the picture of the public vault, but he did that. But he's got all the different photographs, so what I want to try to do someday is see how many of these we have upstairs there and kind of put together the set of what things look like in town. All right, now, as I mentioned, we've had several families come into town here in the last few months and donate photographs. And the one family that came in here was the Kent family. The Kents settled in Freedom Township in the 1840s. They were over in the Sharon Township. They were down in Manchester. A very, very big family, the Kent family. And they were married into another family called the Lamours. So the Kent and the Lamours came down from Canada, late 1830s. They were intermarried together and had all sorts of descendants. And I've been assisting the Kent and Lamour families in tracking down Manchester-specific things. They came down here about 2 months ago. They brought down a box full of photographs, all sorts of things. And I scanned a lot of what they had. And they told all sorts of stories, which we've documented. And one interesting story they told was about Lodowick Lamore, the original Lamore family ancestor who came here. He was here in Manchester in 1838. And we found some evidence of things in the records about him in Manchester. But one thing that was interesting was he bought the lot, which is now 416 East Main. So about 8 houses down from us on north side of Main Street. There's a house down there now. If you go down there and you notice that the house is very narrow and long, kind of like the blacksmith shop is narrow and long because it's built on a half lot. So 416 East Main is built on a half lot. Most of the houses here are on full lots. And they told us why that was. Turns out that Lodowick Lamore and his wife Eunice, they were Canadian. Of course, they're Canadian. They came down, they settled here in Manchester, and somewhere in the mid-1840s they split up, divorce, whatever. And she went back with her son to Canada. He stayed here. So he owns this lot. He bought that lot at 416 East Main, and he goes into bankruptcy in 1848. And he's trying to dump his property. Well, his Canadian wife, Canadian ex-wife, gets wind of it, and she files a lawsuit. And apparently in Canada, in the 1840s, women had equal property rights. So if there was a lot that was owned by Lodowick and Eunice, and yes, they got divorced and everything, but he is now an American trying to sell this lot, and she filed a lawsuit, and it became kind of a minor famous lawsuit that Canadian women had dower rights to half of all their husband's property. And it went into court down here, and she won. So that got split in half. So Lodowick got his half of the lot, and she got the other half of the lot, which she sold to the people next door. And if you walk down there now, you see this 416 East Main. I think it's Maria Perkins is her name and owns it. Narrow little house there. The house was built about 1849 originally by a guy named Frederick Chapman. And I thought that's kind of an interesting story that she claimed Canadian rights and they were upheld. Okay. Anyways, they came down here, and the Kents came down here, and they brought some pictures with them. The one in the upper left corner, if you notice, the man there is sitting on the table. He has a full upper body and he has feet, but no legs. Okay. And the woman is a Kent. So the Kent woman is tied into this man. His name is Eli Bowen. And the Kents were telling me when they were here that he was quite a famous circus performer and did quite a few stunts with walking on his hands and stuff. And so I actually Googled him, and there's a whole Wikipedia article about him. And this picture was taken in Manchester, and he came here and was visiting and with his cousin, I guess she is. And so we've got that picture. The one on the upper right is the man who ran the circus, Vanderkoven. He ran the circus. It was very prominent here in Manchester, 1870s, 1880s. Look him in Alan Dyer's Index of the Enterprise. He's all over there. So we got a picture of him that was taken. The man on the lower right is a Kent. We don't know who he is. And the man on the lower right is again another Kent, but it was photographed by J.H. Miller, whose building I just showed you there on the south side of Main Street. So we actually have a photograph from J.H. Miller from 1875. So we've been able to collect all these photographs from people coming down here. They let me scan them. In many cases, they just donate the pictures to us. And we're really building up our collection with some kind of interesting things. Here's another one. This is another Keefe girl. Well, there's a reason I had this one here. Again, Henry Bissell did this one. But again, notice the words, likenesses of deceased friends can be enlarged from daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and small photographs. So post-mortem photography was popular back then. If you had somebody who died, you would take a photograph of them to preserve who they were in your memory. And I did that because this is a Kent child. It's clearly a post-mortem photograph. They took a picture of this infant sitting in the chair and a picture laying on the couch. And that was very popular back then, and you see a lot of these old photographs that are clearly post-mortem photographs taken after a person had passed away. And the photographers here in town would say, bring in your old daguerreotypes, where you only have the one print, and I'll make copies of them for you of people, family members who have passed away. So they had a couple of these in the photograph album that they brought down. We also had visitors down here from the Case family. The Case family was very well known in Manchester. And I picked one out here. The woman in the, sitting right here, is a Case. These are all Manchester people. The only one they could identify was their direct relative sitting on the porch leaning against the pole there. And one of the things they're working on is trying to figure out which house this was. Now, that might be a bit tricky there, but they feel they can walk around town trying to figure out where this house is. But this was the Case family reunion, taken somewhere probably about, looks like 1895 or thereabouts. They also brought this one down. This is taken by Samuel Davis. It's a Manchester Church Sunday school class. And they were asking me if there was some way we could figure out what church it was, because they weren't sure if it was Emmanuel or one of the other churches here in town. So part of our plan is to go around to the churches there and see if there's something about the picture they may be able to identify who this teacher was in the middle of the picture there and what church it may be. Another one, they came down, these are Case and Knisley and different families. They're all identified in the back. Photography is getting more casual, more fun. Yeah, this is a photographer named George Ford, and so let's not be so formal about things. Let's kind of relax and have some fun. But all the people are identified in here. Again, it's all part of the Case family that came down. This one here was a photographer named Mert Day, and this is John Cohen. Jeremiah Corey, I'm sorry, Jeremiah Corey. So he is the owner of the builder of the house that the Okies live in up the hill. And so Jeremiah Corey was part of our sesquicentennial discussion. He was the man that led all the efforts to create Manchester Village. And I have found